On Tech News Today, a new index ranks Silicon Valley companies on how well they protect the rights of users. Plus, a new home gadget lets you control how your kids use the internet and when. And does the new Google Nexus 6P bend? Yes, it does, right before it breaks. It's all coming up next on Tech News Today.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Wednesday, November 4th, 2015. This episode is brought to you by Gazelle, the online marketplace for buying and selling used gadgets. Shop from a variety of certified pre-owned electronics or trade one in for cash. Give a new life to a used device. Visit Gazelle.com today. And by Prosper. Prosper is a peer-to-peer lending marketplace that connects people who are looking to borrow money with those who have money to lend. Visit prosper.com/TNT to apply for a loan now. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. My name is Mike Elgan. Our co-anchor today is ZDNet contributing writer Kevin Tofel. Hey, Kevin, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Enjoying an unseasonably warm fall day in southeastern Pennsylvania, 73 and sunny.
Now, you got wheels on the bottom of your sneakers right now, don't you? What's going on there?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. I bought myself an early Christmas present that the kids have already stolen multiple times. I bought one of those self-balancing scooters or personal transporters, whatever you want to call them. It's electric. You stand on it. It's self-balancing, as I said. It's got gyroscopes, and you just zoom around up to 10 miles an hour. And just before the show, I was enjoying the weather out there, scooting around the street and on the sidewalks and all, having a blast.
Now, you have male children, right? You have boys, is that right?
One son, one daughter.
Okay. So, yeah, I had two boys. So my solution to everything was paint everything pink. And it would sort of suppress their desire to steal it and go out in public with it. Now, you also pointed, you were also complaining on Twitter about the stupidity of smart bulbs. Can you talk about your experience with the future of lighting?
Oh, boy. You know, I do another podcast with Stacey Higginbotham. I do the IoT podcast. So I do a lot of testing smart home gear. I've been doing smart home integrations in my own home for 5 years now. And I was just so frustrated yesterday. And I kind of hate to take to Twitter to it, but I found it amusing, so I shared it. Behind me, I have a lamp that uses an Osram Lightify light bulb, which I love. And it's tuned into my Amazon Echo, so I can turn it on, turn it off by voice. But it wasn't working at all. So I tried to reinstall it into my system, didn't work. I couldn't reset it. So I dug around and found out how to reset the light bulb. And no, it is not open and close all the windows in your home. That is not the answer. The answer is to turn the light on for 5 seconds and off for 5 seconds, 5 successive times. That resets the innards of the bulb. It worked, and I was able to get everything back up and running. But boy, oh boy, it's like, you know, it's 2015. This is the future, turning the lights on and off 5 times in a row.
Unbelievable. I think that for the smart home of the future, we should just, Microsoft should make a little box that has a Control-Alt-Delete on it. And you just reboot the whole house, and then everything will be fine.
That would actually be easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump into our regular news. If you think technology companies are doing a lousy job protecting your freedom of speech and privacy, well, you're absolutely right, at least according to the first ever Ranking Digital Rights Corporate Accountability Index. Sam Thielman is a tech reporter for The Guardian and wrote about it for The Guardian, and he joins us now. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here to explain all this. Now, who are these Ranking Digital Rights people, and what do they want?
Well, so these guys are kind of the think tank within the think tank at the Open Technology Institute, which is part of the New America Foundation. It's a little nonprofit in Washington, D.C. that talks about tech policy and how laws should be made about tech companies, but in this case, it's kind of talking about how laws are made by tech companies, which is, I suppose, a little frightening, but also just kind of a fact of modern day existence. So the group is headed by this woman, Rebecca McKinnon, who used to be at CNN, is very smart, and put together a standard using both the United Nations and then the business school Wharton's Corporate Accountability Index.
So, Sam, how do these companies or the big companies do in this? Because let's face it, consumers really don't read the terms of service. And when they're updated, that's even, another chance to read them. And people probably don't. I noticed some big standout names on there. And I even saw one major company WhatsApp, major app rather, WhatsApp, have a score of 0 in this. How did everybody do?
Well, they all failed. I mean, some of them, Google, I guess, got a D overall.
That's a passing grade.
Still does. Yeah, yeah. They're the only ones who got a passing grade. It's a lot of this just happens because these companies develop these agreements essentially to protect themselves from consumers. But of course, if you protect yourself from consumers too hard, consumers won't use your applications. So because these rules are enforceable both ways, like you can actually, people have successfully sued Facebook under their own terms of service. They have to be written very carefully. But because they also, cross national borders, they have to be written in such a way that they can be carried out in all the countries where the companies do business. In some cases, these tech companies are actually watching out for consumers in ways that governments aren't. They're saying, yes, you can encrypt your stuff in ways that we can never get at it, so no one will be able to get to it with a subpoena. They tell the consumers whether or not they're cooperating with very, very secret orders like the National Security Letter or the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Those are things that governments would probably rather they didn't do, but that they're doing to sort of show willing, because privacy kind of sells these days.
Now, this report was global. They talked about companies in other countries as well, but let's focus on the U.S. for a second. They're covering censorship and privacy, essentially. And censorship and privacy, when the government, the U.S. government, the federal government, is actually violating free speech and privacy, is in fact a right. It's guaranteed by the Constitution, First Amendment for right of free speech, and Fourth Amendment, I guess, is one of the amendments that protects privacy to a certain extent. But when we're talking about Google and Facebook, are these rights really? I mean, is digital rights the correct phrase? I mean, don't users voluntarily give up their privacy and right to free speech when they agree to get these free services?
Well, to an extent, I guess they do, but they also have to. They're also giving something to the companies. I mean, YouTube, for example, is a platform that is entirely user-generated content, right? It's people with YouTube subscriptions uploading videos. YouTube doesn't make. I mean, they used to make a little bit of stuff, and they're sort of expanding into that. But, the vast majority of the content you see on there is stuff that people just upload themselves. So it needs to be a mutually beneficial deal in order for people to participate in it. In terms of whether or not they're fundamental rights, there is the United Nations has its own charter on human rights. They actually have a charter on digital rights. As technology goes forward, there's a much greater sense that we have to be careful about protecting rights that can be expressed digitally.
Sam, you probably know here in the U.S. we just had the Cyber Security Information Sharing Act, get passed through, and I'm wondering, what's the relation of what these rankings are and what these companies are doing to the CISA law that we have now?
Well, that's a great question. CISA is, it has to go back through conference in the House before it's actually on the books as code. But one of the things that I hope this will do is create a framework around which companies are, freer and more willing to share the extent to which they're cooperating or not cooperating with governments. This isn't a grade on how often they cooperate. It's a grade on whether or not they tell you they cooperate. It's all about public disclosures. A bunch of these companies have really interesting and detailed public disclosures. Facebook, Microsoft, Google, they all produce, big documents every year that say, okay, this is how many times we told the FBI what was in somebody's email account. Hopefully, those disclosures will become more prevalent and detailed, and hopefully they will also include the program that CISA creates, about which there are no details in the bill. It's totally opaque at this point. So really, we kind of need these companies to come out and do what the government refuses to do.
I'm curious why they didn't include Apple, because, of course, Apple claims to protect users' rights, especially of privacy. Do you know why they didn't include Apple?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so Apple's obviously the largest technology company in the world. They don't provide their email service is less popular than the email services included, and they don't provide connectivity. They're one of the reasons they're such a large technology company is that they make such great hardware. But this isn't a survey of hardware manufacturers. It's about people who operate on the internet or who provide internet access. I know, I talked to these guys and I said the one I really wanted to see on there was Comcast. And I said, why didn't you guys include them? They just said we're a small organization. We had time to do either a few companies rigorously or a lot of companies badly, and we chose to do a few companies rigorously. I hope they get more funding. I hope people come forward and say, hey, we think this is a worthy project. You guys should do it again next year and again the year after that, and include more companies every time.
Yeah, I hope you're right on that. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Silicon Valley is terrible, and other tech companies and carriers are terrible at protecting your rights. And Google is a little bit less terrible. So there you go. Sam Thielman is at theguardian.com and on Twitter at Sam Thielman. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Bye-bye. Got more news coming up, but first I want to talk about Gazelle. Guess what, folks? Don't look now, but the holidays are coming. You're going to be buying gifts for your loved ones. And the first place you should always shop is on Gazelle, GAZELLE.com, because you can buy an amazing product. For example, let me just throw one out here. You can buy an iPad mini for $169. That's a great device. This is a device that can serve as a little TV for cord cutters, as a picture frame for revolving photos, sit on the mantle. It can function, believe it or not, as a touch tablet. $169. It's such a great way to go because if, let's say you're going to spend $169 on a gift for somebody, what are you going to buy that's better than an iPad mini? I mean, this is a great place to buy phones, tablets, you name it, Android devices, iPhones, whatever. And again, you're going to see lots of articles coming out as they do every single year with ways to save money and get great gifts for the holiday season that are technology oriented. And they're going to tell you to go to Gazelle. So I'm telling you now, so you don't have to read these articles. Just go to Gazelle and make sure you do your shopping at Gazelle. It's a great place to do holiday shopping. Give life to used electronics, trade in for cash, or buy certified pre-owned. Visit Gazelle.com today. And one of the reasons you should do that is that they have a great guarantee, 30-day guarantee. You can just return it if you don't like it. And they also put everything through a really gnarly inspection to make sure everything works flawlessly. So go to Gazelle, GAZELLE.com, and make sure you do your holiday shopping at Gazelle. Silicon Valley's diversity problem just made its way back on the agenda. Leslie Miley, Twitter's highest-ranking black engineer, just very publicly left the company, saying that diversity issues at Twitter drove him out, and he wrote about his decision on Medium. Salvador Rodriguez interviewed Miley for an article on International Business Times and joins us now to talk about it. Welcome to you, Salvador.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Was Miley laid off or did he quit?
So from my reporting and interviewing Leslie before he posted his story on Medium is that he had told Twitter that he was going to be leaving by the end of October. He actually had a date of 10/31 to get out of the company. And essentially, they decided to include him in the layoffs. They came to him saying, hey, this is a better way for you to exit. And of course, especially if you signed this disparagement contract, not to chat about your experience here. But Leslie is in a position where he chose not to do that because the reason he was leaving the company was he didn't think that they were doing enough to be more inclusive with their hiring, especially on the engineering team, which as an African-American man was important to him, but also as a person who loves Twitter and understands that lack of diversity is hurting the product, it was also important to him for that reason.
Salvador, I mean, having gone through a startup shutdown back in March myself and having to get a severance package, but only if I signed an NDA, not to talk about everything, I can totally sympathize with the situation that he's going through. It does sound like he was going to leave anyway, but don't you think it's very telling and makes a huge statement that he chose not to take the money when he left anyway? He could have done that, yes?
Yeah, he certainly could have. And, from my reporting, I do a lot of work on tech diversity, and I've been looking into how these layoffs have impacted individuals from underrepresented groups, that being women, Hispanics, and African Americans. And right now, no one who was laid off is talking because most people did take those contracts. Leslie, however, is a longtime veteran, someone who has worked at Google, someone who has worked at Apple, and of course Twitter, and was in a position where he didn't have to, and instead he saw that there was much more value sharing his experience and letting the world know what it's like to be a person at one of these companies trying to push for diversity, and at the same time, alienating yourself and putting a crosshair on your back.
What does Twitter's employee diversity picture look like exactly?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that on the tech team, which is essentially, the engineers, the product team, the ones who put the service that the users or create the service that the users ultimately take advantage of, it's not very good. I believe for African Americans, it's about 1%. I think Hispanics is 3%. And for women, I think it's got to be maybe 17% tops. But if you look at usage, Twitter is used by, I believe, around 27% of African American adults that are online in the U.S., about 25% or so for Hispanics, and around more than 21%, I believe, for women. So these are communities that are online that are very engaged, especially if you break it down by Black Twitter or feminist Twitter. These are communities who have really tapped in to Twitter and have really found how to use the product to its highest potential. But when it comes to making decisions for, how are we going to build this product? What new features should we bring in? Their input is largely ignored. And I feel like the word ignored is actually not even accurate. It's just not even considered at all.
Now, if you think that 3% Hispanics is 3 times as good as 1% blacks, in fact, Twitter exists in the city of San Francisco. That's where its headquarters are, which is in the state of California, where Hispanics/Latinos, depending on how you slice it, they're not the majority in terms of more than 50%, but they're the largest individual group, more than recently passed that milestone. So the measures on blacks, Hispanics, and women across the board are pretty dismal. And you mentioned, Salvador, the contrast between the user base and the internal sort of Twitter employee diversity picture. Doesn't Twitter want to be representative of their user base? I mean, as you pointed out, black people, there are all kinds of, there's a black Twitter movement. There are all kinds of heavy usage sort of communities that have formed on Twitter. Also, U.S. Hispanics and Latin Americans worldwide are huge users. What is their resistance to actually trying to reflect their user base, do you think?
Well, a lot of times this is simply just, systemic of the way that Silicon Valley came to be. I think most people in the industry aren't trying to, actively exclude minorities or women. It's simply that a lot of these companies were funded by venture capital firms that are primarily run by white men and a couple of Asian men, and then very few women and minorities. So that, of course, leads to more startups being funded that are led by white men. And then these white men, you're in a very competitive field and you need to hire very quickly. So who do you turn to? You turn to the school that you went to. Oftentimes that's a Stanford, a Berkeley, or an Ivy League, which are predominantly filled with white men when it comes to computer science degrees. And so all of a sudden you have a company that's full of white men from these schools, and then you get to the size of Twitter, and at that point it's just kind of too late to really change your culture of the company or your hiring practices on a dime. This is really a process that takes many years, and we're really only into year 2 of the tech industry's efforts to really become much more diverse. So this is why we're seeing more initiatives to reach out to other schools like Howard and to try new avenues for recruiting. But this is also why at the same time Twitter got in trouble this summer for one of its teams hosting a frat-themed party, because this goes back to the companies being funded and led and recruited by white men seeking other white men essentially to work with.
So Miley was, considered a top engineer there at Twitter. I'm curious, I would imagine that in his role, he probably would have had the ear of management. And I'm wondering if in your conversation with him, he was able to talk to Jack Dorsey or anybody else at Twitter about this before and or after. I'm actually curious if Twitter's even responded to this now that it's public.
Yeah, so as far as the response, Twitter was very they were very respectful about how they treated Leslie publicly in this matter. They said that, they simply addressed the fact that they do care about diversity. They didn't out Leslie or try to discredit him, which I've seen with some of my other sources who have spoken up. So credit to Twitter for taking that approach. I do know from my reporting that Jack and Leslie have spoken, and that Jack has iterated to both Leslie and others out there who are pushing for tech diversity that this is something that he cares about, and more importantly, that this is something that he knows the company needs. So I know that Jack is aware of it, and it seems like it's something that he cares about. But as Leslie put it, these kinds of efforts, Jack won't really trumpet themselves, or won't trumpet them for himself. He's going to kind of let his work speak for itself instead. But earlier this summer, I know that Recode reported that Jack had, at a company meeting, responded to a question from a minority about, how he cared about diversity and whether it was a priority. And he said that it was. And that question came from Leslie. So I know that Jack has iterated that to Leslie.
One of the things about human beings is that we are bundles of cognitive biases, and this affects all of our thinking, and one of them is in hiring. This happens across the board. People tend to hire people who are like themselves. I know that 3 years ago or so, there was a bunch of studies that showed that in academia, people tended to hire people with the same political persuasion, which is why I believe it's something like 72% of university faculties and college faculties are politically liberal and only 15% conservative. And many professors have actually admitted that they have discriminated against people based on their political leanings. And so that's an industry, if you will, the education industry, that has really gone awry. They've just really taken a left turn decades ago, and there's no getting back because of this cognitive bias. In the case of diversity in Silicon Valley, it's going to require more pressure. It's going to require more creative thinking, and it sounds to me like that's exactly what Miley was pushing for, and which Twitter was not delivering on, and therefore he left. He also was at Google, right? Did he encounter the same thing at Google?
He did. He said that earlier in his career, he went through something similar. He didn't want to out, the person or the unit where that happened. But essentially, the importance of that experience for him is that it's what it ultimately inspired him to not sit quiet at Twitter when he went through it again. He wanted to make sure that these individuals who are going out of their way to prevent diversity from happening, that it be known that they're doing this, and that they're the reason why these products aren't doing better with certain markets. Because, not only is it the right thing to do, you don't want to let minorities or women get left behind, especially as the tech industry and software become more and more important to our country and to the world. But also, you're leaving money on the table. Let's talk about venture capitalists again, right? For every venture capitalist that doesn't have an African-American man, a woman, or Hispanic person among their partners, they're ignoring ideas from entrepreneurs of the same background. And at the same time, we're set to have Hispanics and African Americans, be just as represented in our country's demographics by the year 2040. And so that those are huge markets that are going to be ignored and not be prepared for. So it's the right thing to do. And there's also lots of money that's getting left on the table.
Yep, you are absolutely right. And it's not just the U.S. You talked about Hispanics. That's a linguistic designation of people who speak Spanish. And there are 21 Spanish-speaking countries in the world. So that is yet another reason these social networks are global. Salvador Rodriguez is at ibtimes.com and on Twitter at Sal19. Salvador, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, bye-bye. Remember Xcode Ghost malware? A fake version of Apple's Xcode tricked iOS app developers in China into creating malware-infected apps. It was first discovered in September. Don't look now, but it's back. This time, it's hitting the U.S., according to a security firm called FireEye. Sara Peters is a senior editor for Dark Reading, and she joins us now. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you for having me.
So glad you're here. Now, where are these U.S. infections coming from exactly?
Well, they're really still coming from the same place. Like you said, it was mostly happening in China before, but the reason for that is because app developers in the US generally download Xcode, which is, like you said, the software that iOS developers use to create iOS applications. Here they usually download Xcode directly from Apple. But in China and in some other countries, the latency is just too long. So instead of downloading it directly from Apple when it would take about 2 hours, they download it from regional third-party services where it takes about 20 minutes. And that is how the original malware authors were able to get to them. They uploaded this malicious, weaponized version of Xcode to this third-party service. And the Chinese app developers downloaded it, created these malicious apps without even knowing that they were doing it, and then got them onto Apple's official app store that way. And there were about 4,000 of them. And since they were Chinese developers, most of the apps they created were popular in China. But they're not just popular in China, as we learned, as FireEye learned. They are also, some of them, popular in the United States. And they're finding that they're here, they're in the US, and they're still active, despite the fact that the attackers officially took Xcode down. It's still happening. It's still in use.
You know, one of the interesting things about this, I remember the original report back in September, everything was China-based, but as I read your reporting, it says that FireEye found 210 U.S. enterprises with infected apps, which is a big, big red flag, enterprises versus consumers. And a lot of the apps are actually calling back to servers in Germany and the U.S., which is really surprising to me. That seems different than what was going on in September.
Right. Well, so in September, the people who claimed that they were the malware authors had a whole bunch of command and control servers that they used to communicate with the infected machines. And they took those offline. But those are still, they could still be hijacked by other threat actors. So even if the original guys aren't using them themselves, some other guys could still be using them through proxies and hijacking them that way. So these infected machines could be communicating to Germany and to the US that way.
Sarah, didn't the creator of Xcode Ghost apologize on Twitter?
Yes, but my contact in China, Hong Jia, she's a researcher with a startup, an intelligence, threat intelligence startup called Threatbook Labs. She was skeptical about this apology because they basically said, "Oh, we're sorry, it was a coding experiment." But she said, you know, they've been working on this thing for over 7 months. They got themselves more than, they had loads and loads and loads of domains, over 20 they picked up just in August and September. They had 3 command and control servers. The software had lots of stealth capabilities within it. And she said, you know, I think if they hadn't been found out, they would have kept going the way they had. They would have just proceeded as usual. And once they were found out, they just got spooked and closed down shop.
Sarah, I remember when this happened in September, it took a few days, but Apple actually, you know, came out and said, okay, we need to stop this because basically, as you pointed out, this is their, Xcode is their IDE or integrated development environment for iOS and Mac apps. So, you know, they said, okay, you really need to be downloading this from the Apple Store, not through a third party, a mirrored site, et cetera. Has Apple said or done anything with this new report? Have they come out and acknowledged anything different or anything that they're doing?
I haven't heard anything from Apple yet, but I would expect that they're going to be coming out with something soon. They've been really, you know, we've picked on Apple a lot over the years. I've certainly picked on them, I have to confess, but they've really been upping their game on security lately. They responded quickly to the Xcode Ghost thing, and they've had to because the trusted development environment was the thing that was the foundation upon which all of their security was built. And Xcode Ghost was the first thing that really cracked into that development environment. And I think that that's scared them, and I think that they really took it seriously. And there are other things that have been happening within Apple that have shown they're starting to take security more seriously. Their market share is a lot bigger now than it was back in the days when it was just Mac versus Windows. Now iOS has become a really big deal, and they can't just hide behind the fact that they've got a small market share. So I expect that they will be responding quickly. But for users, really what you have to do is just update your apps, because they responded to Xcode Ghost back in September. And if you still have it on your machine, it's probably because you just didn't update your infected apps in the first place.
And shame on you for not doing that. Update your apps, folks. Especially,
shame on us all.
Not just if you're on Apple, especially if you're on an Android device, update everything as often as you can, early and often. Sara Peters is at umb.com and on Twitter at Sara Peters. Sara is S-A-R-A with no H on the end. Sara Peters. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
On yesterday's show, we talked briefly about San Francisco's Proposition F, which was a ballot initiative hoping to restrict Airbnb and other short-term rental companies. The measure was hotly contested because of skyrocketing housing prices in San Francisco. The median price for a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is, are you sitting down? $3,200. That means that half of the one-bedroom apartments in San Francisco are more than $3,200 a month. Not a year, a month. Proponents argued that Airbnb rentals diverted housing to vacationers rather than to residents who needed the housing. Opponents said renting out rooms enabled people to afford continuing living in the city, which is with its rising cost of living. The opponents won the vote, with 55% of voters supporting Airbnb's bid to remain unrestricted. And of course, it has to be said, Kevin Tofel, that this was supposedly a contest between people who wanted Airbnb-type rentals and those who didn't. But in fact, it was really a contest between Airbnb and the hotel industry, especially the Hotel Workers Union, although Airbnb outspent them all. Airbnb spent $8 million to defeat this, and that worked. The Hotel Workers Union spent about $500,000.
Yeah, I can see that battle. I've actually I go out to San Francisco for a lot of the mobile events out there for Microsoft, Google, Apple, and such. And when they have an event out there, usually the hotel prices skyrocket even higher than they normally are, and they're often quite high to begin with. So I've actually used Airbnb and HomeAway and some others to actually have a place to stay. Sometimes you can't even get a hotel room when there's an event like that going on. So there's no choice but to do that. So I understand that where the hotels are coming from and the housing market and so on, but these companies provide a service that's definitely valuable to people who live out of town.
Yeah, and it also has to be said, as I have said in some of the columns that I've written, that San Francisco is the center of the on-demand economy and the sharing economy universes, in the same way that Detroit used to be, or maybe still is, the center of the car industry in the U.S., the way Orlando is related to Disney, the way Miami is related to sitting around on the beach, et cetera. It's really part of the city's identity, and I hope that people can embrace it because it's really an interesting experimental city for that reason. So, and Airbnb, of course, is a global company, but it's headquartered in San Francisco. Well, we told you yesterday about Amazon's new brick-and-mortar store. Today, we're here to report another store. Motorola is opening its first retail location this week. It's in Chicago, the place where Motorola was born. And it's called the Moto Shop. The store will showcase Motorola phones, including the Moto X and Droid Turbo 2, as well as watches like the Moto 360. Kevin Tofel, I think this is more of a showcasing place rather than a place where you go and buy stuff. They really want people to try the Motorola products, tourists, and so on. And do you think this is a worthwhile? Is this designed, for example, to maintain the presence in the U.S. of Motorola now that it's a Chinese-owned company?
I think that has a lot to do with it, Mike, and that's partly because with the newest Motorola phones, they're not selling them through carriers, at least not initially. So it's all online sales or direct sales. There's no place, as you said, for people to go try out these phones. And these are unique phones in that you can have so many different combinations of colors and materials on the back. You get wood and bamboo and all kinds of different materials, leather, for example. How would you know what it's even like to have a phone with a leather back if you can't, go look at one? Plus, they also have the Moto 360 smartwatch and such. So, yeah, I don't know that this is going to work out financially for Motorola, but I think it is very much a brand presence play, and it's probably a smart one given that few carriers are actually now selling their phones.
Yeah, and we also had a story yesterday about Google's apparent cancellation of a store that was going to be in a specific location. But as we learned from our guest who covers real estate in New York City, they're probably just moving it to a more spectacular location, what they call a super pier location. I don't know. I can't wait to see it. I guess it's like a super barge, but one that is legal. I miss the mystery barge. I really do. I miss that mystery barge. All right, well, we got some more news coming right up. But first, I want to talk about Prosper. We talk about the sharing economy. I consider Prosper, one of our sponsors today, a sharing economy play. Essentially, it's a startup. It's been around for years, actually. They invented the peer-to-peer lending category. But I consider them a sharing economy play because essentially you're sharing money with other people. You're not going through a huge corporation, a huge bank. This is a great way for you to borrow money because you're borrowing it from other people just like you who are investing in you. And the terms are so straightforward. You know exactly what you're getting into. There's no penalty for paying off the loan early. The money comes right out of your account, and you can get the loan very, very quickly. In fact, you can get up to $35,000 in as few as 5 days, and you can use that money to pay off your high-rate credit cards that the banks and other financial institutions have saddled you with. Sometimes they just change their rate, and then you end up with this huge 2-digit rate. Forget all that. Just pay it off with a great Prosper loan, and then you have a straightforward loan to pay off. And when that's paid off, you are done, and you'll save a ton of money. You can get a green loan. You can get a car loan. You can get any kind of loan. And again, this is a sharing economy. This is people loaning money to other people and then paying those people back. And it's all very, very straightforward. It's the better way to get the cash you need at a low interest rate. And you can check your low rate instantly, and it doesn't affect your good credit. Just go to prosper.com/TNT for up to $35,000 in your account in as few as 5 days. Go to prosper.com/TNT. That's prosper.com/TNT. In news you can use, a company called Circle Media has collaborated with Disney to create a parental control device for the home called Circle with Disney. It costs $99 and it connects to your Wi-Fi network to control who can access what and when. Using an iOS app, parents can set up a user profile for each internet-connected device in the house. That's right, it's device by device. It can block porn and restrict the hours of the day when each device can get online. Circle with Disney can even let parents put time limits on specific apps or even content categories. For example, you can set up a limit of 1 hour per day on games for a specific device. Circle with Disney can't restrict access via mobile connections, but the companies are working on a subscription app called Circle Go that will do just that. What do you think about this, Kevin Tofel, as a parent? Does this sound like something parents are going to want?
Well, at first glance, I said, no, I don't see the need for this because many routers actually allow you to do similar types of control, ways to control this kind of access on a per device level and so on. And I also thought, gee, there's got to be a subscription involved. But it turns out there's no subscription involved for this particular device. You buy it once for $99, attach it to your router, it works over Wi-Fi. So that's not too shabby, the fact that it's non-subscription based. And you know what? Some routers actually don't even have the functionality or it's too difficult to use. In fact, the Google On-Hub router that I use, you can't do device restrictions such as that. All you can do is actually prioritize a device so it has a faster, better Wi-Fi signal. So that's kind of lacking on Google's part in that case. So you know what? There might be a market for this after all. I don't think it's going to be a massive one, but I do think if it's simple to use and it's only $99, there could be some people, some parents that would be very interested in this.
Yeah, and I think that even people who aren't parents might use this to restrict their own activity. Don't let me spend so much time on Reddit, for example. Anyway, I'm dreaming. News you could lose: an iPhone 6 phone. The iPhone 6 got caught up in a scandal known as Bendgate because some users said the phone bent slightly when you put the wrong kind of pressure on it. Apple addressed the issue with the iPhone 6S line, which has much stronger aluminum. Now Google's new Nexus 6P is feeling the pressure. The vlogger behind the YouTube channel Jerry Rig Everything put the Nexus 6P to the bend test, and here's what happened.
Know what to expect before you buy it. Nobody plans on wrecking their car, but it's good to know it's safe if you do. Now let's find out what we can expect from the Nexus 6P.
Oh, that is painful. Just bend it in half. It bent and then it broke.
Small dovetail joints I was
Wow,
talking to you about before.
that is ugly. Is this fair, Kevin Tofel? Is this a fair test to just grab a phone and with brute force bend it in half and say, "Look at this. This bends and breaks when you bend and break it"?
Is it fair? Well, people can do anything they want with their devices, and if this is what Jerry Rig Everything wants to do with his Nexus P, more power to him. He said, you want to buy a car, you want to know it's safe beforehand. I wonder if he crashes the cars before he buys them too. This is silly to me. I think if there's a legitimate issue from regular use, absolutely it should be highlighted. But doing what he just did in the Nexus 6P is certainly not regular use. I don't know. I don't see the point.
Yeah, I want to test this for myself. When Jason Howell gets up to make himself a scotch in the break room, I'm going to grab his 6P and see what happens when I bend and break it. To be fair, the first, I guess 10 minutes or whatever of this video, he's identifying what he considers specific flaws in the design, such as the placement of buttons. Whenever there's a button, a physical button around the case, there's a hole there, and then what's left once the metal has been removed for the hole is a thin piece of metal, and that's in fact where it's breaking. And so that's one of the problems that he sees with it. But hopefully we'll get some more independent tests on this to see if this is a real serious problem. And of course, the proof is in the pudding. If people actually have bent and broken phones by just normal wear and tear, rather than when they gorilla the thing in half, then that could be a real problem. But I'm sure that Google will honor returns, et cetera, for phones that have bent or broke in the normal.
Probably not that one though.
Not that one. No, that one is it. No, he lost that one. All right, got some feedback from some TMT fans, including Amit Schreiber, who sent us email. He says, "Hi, Mike. On the November 3rd episode, you mentioned the Google Auto Reply AI news from Google. It immediately occurred to me that this is probably the way Google will get users to train their neural network. We've seen two instances of such things from Google in the past. Number one, using CAPTCHA to decipher the text Google couldn't decipher in books that they scanned. And in images, you'd get two CAPTCHAs, and one of them wasn't really required, but was being used to sort of crowdsource what an address or whatever it was. Number two, using their free 411 service to get the voices of people, phenoms I believe is the term, to improve their translate service. I love it when Google does stuff like this and believe this kind of everybody wins technology is the best kind. I think that in the years Google tried to unite everything under the Google Plus umbrella, their rate of innovation was slowed down significantly. And recently there's a return to form, which is wonderful. I've been a fan of yours for many years. I registered for your mailing list before there were blogs. So it's great for me that you have your own show these days. Keep it up. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. He's talking about the raw feed, which was my blog that existed before blogs, and that was an email newsletter essentially. All right, we got another email from. Did you want to comment on this, Kevin Tofel?
Well, I would tend to agree with him. It's nice to see Google pushing forward with the neural network type things and the context and personalized information, something beyond just scanning and reading emails, but more how you interact with your devices and so on. So I agree with him completely. I'm
fascinated with Smart Reply. I'm writing an article about it right now. And it's just the more I pull the thread out of the sweater, the more fascinating it comes. That was a mangled metaphor. But anyway, it's fascinating. Got another email from a fan named Jacob Turnbow, who said, I regularly listen to your show and gain a lot of insight about the tech world from it. But I was surprised, however, that you were surprised that Chrome OS would be integrated into Android, since I was expecting it since they first released Chrome OS. Ever since the ill-fated Ubuntu on Android died, I've been hoping they would release something similar, and I think Chrome OS on Android could be that. I would love to be able to dock my phone at my desk and run a desktop workstation off of it. With the new lower latency of the Chromecast released this year, this also has potential for the implementation of an interface tailored for a living room or conference room. I don't know why they haven't experimented with stuff like this before, since it would be so useful and would endear people more to their ecosystem. I know Windows 10 phones supposedly have some sort of similar feature if you dock it with a mouse and keyboard, but I've never used a Windows phone, so I don't know how well it works. I, for one, will be very disappointed with Google if they don't develop this potential use. I love your show and rely on it. Keep me up to date with the world's technology. Thank you for that. Kevin Tofel, do you think that this uniting of Chrome OS and Android is going to result in the ability to use a phone as if it was desktop with a external monitor?
I think that's definitely a possibility, and I think what he was referring to is Microsoft's Continuum program where you can use the
Yep.
phone. It turns into a full computer with an external keyboard and monitor. I think that's part of it. There's a lot of news about, a lot of thoughts about Google merging Chrome OS and Android like it was brand new. The fact is, at Google's I/O 2014, right on stage, they were showing, hey, we've got something, we're going to put Android apps on Chrome OS. And they've
Yep.
been slowly working on that, and it needs work, yes. I don't think this is the big one unified operating system that some people are reporting, although I think some people would enjoy using that. It could be one device that, since Chrome and Android both run on ARM chips or on x86 chips from Intel, you could have one device that runs Chrome OS in the laptop mode and then take the display off and with the guts inside it, and it's an Android tablet. I mean, there's a lot of different things Google can do here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. I've wanted a Chrome tablet for a long time, but without apps, it's kind of pointless to have that. So this is definitely worth watching. I don't think it's as new as people realize. I think, people read into it a little too much.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. And I do love Continuum. I think it's a fantastic idea. Just yesterday, I was for some reason, decided to use my iPhone at my desk, and I have a Microsoft keyboard that I love that I use with my iPhone. And if there was a Continuum-like feature for my phone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever, I'd be able to just sit there with a big monitor and just, it would be better. It was just the only thing that was compromised about it was the size of the screen, which is way too small. I'd also like to see Android get a cloud-only mode, so you could just throw a switch and nothing could be installed on it, and it would essentially have that feature of the Chromebook. That way you'd be protected from malware or whatever. And so I'm sure there's a way to do that now, but I would like to see that be a standard, easy-to-implement feature. We've got another email from Bill Erickson, who said, Mike, everyone talks about self-driving cars, but nobody addresses the liability issue if one is an accident. Who will be liable? The maker of the software, just like we hold car makers responsible for defects? Will Apple or Google want to take on that liability? And that's a great question. Kevin Tofel, do you have a sense of who should be liable? If Google's self-driving car crashes into somebody, should Google be sued, or should the non-driver? Like, who's responsible for that accident?
Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to speak with any authority on it, but I can give you my opinion on it, and that would be the company that creates the software. As long as that software is taking control away from the driver, I don't see how the driver could be liable, quite frankly, if the software fails and causes some type of accident. I don't know how it works. I've never had a situation where, say, my brakes failed due to a manufacturing defect, but I would suspect that if I could prove the brakes had failed, then that would be on the manufacturer in terms of liability. I think it would be the same thing when it comes to self-driving cars.
Reason. I like it. That's a good point. All right, well, we got another comment on YouTube from Mud Hooks. Yeah, Mud Hooks, who said, Google may have changed their real names policy, but I still can't change my username to the name I've been using for over 10 years, where everywhere else I can use it without breaking it in half as though I was a regular name. I can't call myself Mud Hooks with all one word, which I used on YouTube since I was using the beta site. They forced me to change it to my real name, and now I can't change it back. Yeah, that's a great point, and we continue to cover Facebook's real names policy, but as Mudhooks points out, Google's isn't perfect either. They really don't quite have a you can call yourself anything you want policy yet, which I would love to see personally. Well, if you've got a comment on our coverage or would like to introduce new subjects, just send an email to tnt@twit.tv, and we'd love to hear from you. And our TNT fan of the day is Bernard in Orlando, Florida, who posted this picture on Instagram. He watches Tech News Today on the new Apple TV. Now, we got 3 apps now out there, third-party apps that have been created by fans. And I don't know which one this is, but if you've got an Apple TV, make sure you are downloading one of these apps and watch us on the Apple TV. I'm told that the show and all the Twitch shows look beautiful on the Apple TV because we're 60 frames per second, etc. Show us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just record a video or take a picture of yourself or your setup and post it on Instagram, Google+, Twitter, or Facebook. And use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT so we can find it. Kevin Tofel, what are you working on besides rebooting your light bulbs?
Well, I got to be honest, buying the self-balancing scooter is really taken away from my productivity. So I need to start managing that a little bit better. But we've got what I think is the iPad Pro going on sale next week. I'm still using a Surface Pro 4 that I purchased. I'm still within the return window. So I'm going to consider what I'm going to do there. I'll probably buy an iPad Pro hopefully next week and put it through the paces and see which device works best for me.
I, for one, would like to see you figure out how to work while on your scooter. You're into wearable devices. You've got Google Glass, so you got a screen. There's got to be a way. And I look forward to that feature that you write about, how to be productive while going 10 miles an hour on one of those darn scooters.
Using Siri or voice activation really works well. I was responding to reader comments yesterday while riding around, just talking to my phone. So it can be done.
Perfect. Wear the earbuds. You keep the phone in your pocket. So, yeah. All right. Well, Kevin C. Tofel on Twitter, thank you so much for co-anchoring today, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Right, bye-bye. Let us know what's on your mind. Send us email to tnt@twit.tv. You can also call us at 260-TNT-SHOW. That's 260-868-7469. You can subscribe to Tech News Today on Apple TV by downloading one of the 3 spectaculicious Apple TV apps for Twit. You can also watch us live every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1700 UTC at twit.tv/live. And you can follow us on Twitter at Tech News Today TV. Don't miss our other news show, Tech News Tonight at 4 p.m. Pacific every single weeknight. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Tech News Today. This show is produced by Jason Cleanthus and edited by Anthony Nielsen. My name's Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.